Okay, why don't we begin? Thank you all very much for joining us. Once again, my name is JT Keating. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium. I will be stepping through some slides here as we begin. In classic webinar fashion, often the standard GoToWebinar user interface, there's opportunity to chat with us, an opportunity to ask questions, which we will field at the end of this. Before we hop in, especially because we've made sure that we've set the time zone very appropriately for certain parts of the world, particularly the areas in and around the Middle East. I'd like to introduce my compatriot, Akil. And so Akil, would you like to introduce yourself and give a little bit of a feel for your role here at Zimperium before we dive in?
Yes, thank you, JT. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Akil Bhutani. I am the GM for the Middle East and Africa business for Zimperium, and we are looking forward to this discussion today on this particular topic of BankBot. And thank you to my colleague JT for taking this opportunity to share some of our thoughts on this one of the biggest vulnerabilities that we're going to address today.
So why don't we just dive right into this topic. One of the things you're going to hear very consistently from us here at Zimperium, and Zimperium has been doing mobile security for the better part of 10 years now, with the evolution and growth of the platform, particularly as people start, obviously moving the majority of our lives that direction. You'll hear us consistently talk about DNA of mobile security. That is device attacks, network attacks, and apps, malicious apps. This webinar today is particularly focused on one of the A's, one of the apps that has been out there and has been evolving and morphing, and we've been seeing make its way around the world. And we actually believe that it is currently very, very focused on the banking industry. We believe that the approach and the technique will continue to be used to target more and more banks, and then also go to other brands, and I can explain why that is. But first of all, just what is BankBot? First of all, BankBot is an Android piece of malware, and it's got certain capabilities and certain techniques that it uses that are very unique to the Android environment, which from a world standpoint means that they have roughly 85% of the world that's available to them as a target. But it is an Android targeting piece of malware that basically, when you really boil it down, is an elegant phishing attack, very similar to phishing sites and spoof sites that started hitting the internet back in the mid 2000s. This is doing something very, very similar on Android devices. And what we're going to do in this webinar is literally kind of step you down through the steps and then kind of talk about, well, what can we do about it, right? So we're going to talk about some of the evolutions, talk about some of the changes. The current instantiation of BankBot has four requirements. First of all, it's smart enough to know whether it's in a real device versus like a virtual kind of test environment. Second, is the current instantiations of it, the device it basically has to be outside of the CIS countries, former Soviet Union, et cetera. A third is the unknown sources must be enabled on those devices, meaning that the user has enabled third-party applications and third-party sources to be able to load onto their system. And then fourth, finally, which we're going to get into, it actually has the app of a targeted bank installed. One of the big differences between Android and iOS is even though apps are not technically supposed to be playing with other apps in the mobile world, which is very different than the traditional endpoint world, in Android, apps can do a scan of all the other apps that are on the device. And as you'll see in a second, that's part of the capability that BankBot uses to do what it does. So one just kind of quick word, as we've seen this, and there's a couple variations of this. There's a little bit of a little bit inconsistency in terms of the researchers around the world in terms of what everybody is seeing, minor nuances here and there. But from our research, what we've seen is this is basically taken a three-phase approach. The first phase, way back in the beginning of 2017, it was pretty much just Russia. And we don't know if that was a test or what the case may be, especially in light of what I just got finished saying of now, if you're in those CIS countries, which obviously Russia is the anchor of, it's not going to work there. Well, the original one was just Russia. So we don't know, again, if it was a test and there wasn't trying to get out, kind of refine it a little bit. Then it went to phase two, which is a lot of folks on this call, which is the next version of it, all of a sudden included a significant set of banks in the GCC region and started saying, okay, now we're going to expand to that direction. And then now we've seen it even as recently as a couple of days ago with variations of it in Poland and other places. Some of the biggest brands now around have been targeted, whether it was Wells Fargo or Chase or any of the rest of them. But basically it's been spreading and is now at a minimum of 27, 28 countries worldwide that has seen it so far. Again, I hearkened back to the phishing sites. I was part of a company a number of years ago that developed one of the first anti-phishing technologies and working with guys like eBay and Visa, PayPal, et cetera. Once these guys started honing their model, then they started expanding to all these other brands and all these other things. So this is something that we're definitely keeping an eye on in terms of how it is spreading, not only in terms of geographically and in terms of number of banks, but even potentially hopping into new industries. So how does this actually work? So first thing is the users will install some kind of a utility app. The primary ones have been flashlights. There have been some games like solitaire, but it's mostly been a utility of some kind. And when they download this utility, what's inside of it is BankBot. One of the things that the most recent version has done is it will not actually wake up and start doing some of its more nefarious things until 2 hours after downloading that particular library. And then part of the reason they've done that is to avoid detection when the app is initially put in. And again, this is a utility app. When it's initially put in to the Play Store to be able to go buy it, they'll do some stuff where it's one version then, and then when it gets updated to include, for instance, the BankBot code we're going to be talking about here, it waits for 2 hours before doing anything, and that is again to avoid some of the detection. So this app is on there. What it does almost immediately is, as I mentioned, in Android, you can do this. It starts looking around the device, and it is now looking for one of the targeted apps, which on the last count is around 160 different banks' apps are on its list. And the list is long and includes some of the biggest and best financial institutions on the planet. So it's now on there. It does an inventory of all of the different applications that are on that device. And if it finds one of its targeted apps, then it knows that, that good things are about to happen for it. Once it has discovered that targeted app, then what it will do is it will actually go back out to its command and control server and say, hey, I've got XYZ Bank or BNB Bank, if we've got this fictional bank, because we didn't want to pick on any particular bank in our visuals. It'll go out and say, hey, I need the template for BNB Bank. And the command and control center will deliver that template back to BankBot. Then what happens is BankBot waits, and it continues to monitor for the target app launching. Now, one of the things that occurs between the two of these in the most recent versions is once that template comes in, the utility will have an upgrade. and we're all used to seeing upgrades all the time. Hey, you need to update the flashlight app. Once you update the flashlight app, one of the things you're doing is you're answering all those yeses to all of these different basically administrative privileges, administrative rights scenarios. So once you've done that, you think for the flashlight app, because most people don't even pay attention to that and click yes. Well, now it is elevated as privileges. I'm going to talk in a little bit about additional capabilities, but obviously most people on this call are focused on how do we protect our mobile banking customers, and through extension, how do we protect our bank, right? So BankBot is now sitting there and it's monitoring for the target app to launch. Once it launches, because it is now asked for those administrative privileges and has certain capabilities, what it does is it layers that template now right over the top of the actual app. So the actual app is open, but it's behind it. You now have this template that looks just like it. And then once it displays that, then of course, what the user does is they provide their credentials into it. And then there's different things that occur. It could either say, "Oh, sorry, you didn't get it correct. Please re-enter it," or it can literally take that information and just flow it directly into the regular app. And the user has given up their information and is nowhere the wiser. So it literally is taking advantage of that capability to do a very simple phishing attack. And the facts are, any security person will tell you that, the biggest threat to security is a human being. In this case, it's a mobile consumer. They're not focused on being super security experts. They expect the bank to take care of that for themselves. And because it is simple and straightforward and looks just like everything I've ever done before, why would they think anything differently? I was at a security summit in DC a little while ago, and the panel that I was on, the audience was very interactive. We got this whole conversation, and they were talking about all the education you need to do for employees as well as potentially for consumers. And the fact is that's right, but we also have to go into the assumption that you're not going to be able to educate everybody, and we have to do things, and we have to take fail-safe measures ourselves to solve these problems. In this case, it is so clean and elegant. Even if you're a security professional, you might not even recognize that it has occurred. For you folks in the UAE, they actually have a variant of this whole thing, and it's other places as well. We've just seen it for the UAE banks. Those folks that actually have some form of a two-factor authentication, it basically is smart enough to know where you are, and basically it's what it is really is. It's off of the template for that particular financial institution. If it requires two-factor, it will actually request the user's phone number, even though they already know it because they're on your phone. But that's the normal process for that. It will send a PIN code for the victim, and then after the victim enters the PIN code, they are asked to put the details, the banking details in. One of the things we think is interesting is that they actually request it twice to make sure that the attacker has valid credentials before they go off to the races. So at its core, it's a very simple, very elegant phishing attack. It has morphed over the last year. Earlier in the year, when they first came out with it, Google allowed accessibility services, which is a service that is designed to help people with visually impaired and things on those lines that can kind of take precedent and take priority. Original versions of BankBot were taking advantage of that. Google shut that down, which is why now, when I mentioned a little while ago that it would provide you with an update, and you need to click update in order to give it the privileges that it needs, that just shows that it's morphing. But at its core, for the initial thrust of the attack, it is basically a phishing attack, and it is putting that template right on top. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's DNA, device attacks, network attacks, app attacks. One of the things in mobile, which is different than traditional endpoints, these three and some of them might not apply. You might not have a lot of network things, but in terms of Wi-Fi type things, but these three are not equal in mobile. Mobile is very uniquely, there's huge differences in mobile security. There's three huge differences off the top of my head. The first one I've already been touching about before, which is whether it's an employee or whether it's a consumer, in mobile, the user is the admin. So the same person we are all worried about, and you know, in a general rule, let's say as an employee inside of an institution, where they could make all sorts of mistakes, but in a traditional endpoint, the admin owns it. The admin can push patches out. The admin can check antivirus. The admin, blah, blah, blah. Here, all of a sudden now, it's the same user, but he is the one deciding whether or not he's going to update, because there is no patch management system for mobile, right? He's going to be the one deciding what networks I'm going to wander in and out of. He's going to be the one to decide, let's say in the BankBot case, what apps are going to download, right? So one huge difference is the user is the admin. Second huge difference in mobile versus traditional endpoints, nobody can jack with the kernel of the operating system. Nobody can go down and play with the kernel of the operating system. So that's good, very good from a security standpoint, but it's a little bit more complicated from a security, software security solution standpoint. Traditional endpoint security, endpoint protection products rely on hooking into the kernel. Can't do that in mobile. And then the third part is everything's containered. Apps are not supposed to talk to other apps. So what we've seen is, you know, the rules of security are still simple and finite. One of the rules is if a hacker's going to take the time to compromise a device, they actually want to maintain a persistent foothold. And the way that occurs in mobile is not through an app. The app could be the conduit to it, but since apps cannot deal with other apps, what you can do is you can use an app to do something like gain administrative privileges, like people can do with BankBot now. So generally speaking, apps are not focused on being totally targeted, meaning going after employees of an enterprise. But in this case, BankBot is targeted from the standpoint of the targeted institutions, but it's not targeted in terms of the user. They put it in the Play Store. Let's see who downloads the flashlight, right? So most of our experience when we've really been looking at things, most of malicious apps are designed for advertising and fraud threats like what we're talking about here. Network attacks, when you talk about targeting an institution, let's say that somebody was trying to target XYZ Corporation, right? They're not going to drop an app in the App Store and hope somebody from XYZ Corporation downloads it. What they're going to do is they're going to do a targeted attack, and that will likely start with a network-based attack. They will sit in a coffee shop across from XYZ Corporation, and they will do a man-in-the-middle attack, and they will survey until they find somebody from XYZ Corporation, and then they will survey that box to say, what are the vulnerabilities associated with it? What version of the operating system is it? And then they'll have a unique exploit to capitalize on that. In mobile, in order to maintain a persistent foothold, you need to do something to actually compromise the device. Have root access, elevation of privileges, something along those lines. Well, as I mentioned, with the new version of BankBot, the fact that you say, yes, okay, yeah, I want to upgrade this. And so I get that administrative privileges that enable me to put that overlay out. Well, that's just the beginning. Now that it is having that elevated privileges, BankBot, even though it's not actively doing this today, it has the ability to do pretty much anything that you would want on the device. You've basically exploited a device. And here's some of the things that we know it could do if it wanted to, whether it was intercepting the messages or tracking infected devices, stealing contacts, screen captures, anything you could do if you actually were a super user on that device, BankBot has the potential to do. So BankBot is really interesting to us from the standpoint of targeting these unique institutions. It's also interesting to us because the app itself is one thing. Once you give it the privileges, you've given it the ability to compromise your device, now it becomes a whole nother ballgame. And it's interesting for BankBot by itself, but it's also interesting as a model, unfortunately, for others. So that's the way BankBot works. That's the sort of thing that it can do, and how it does some of its magic, right? We talked earlier about the fact that you can't really rely on end users to be able to recognize the stuff because they're very good. I mean, I hate to say it, but it is a very clean, very elegant, well thought out attack, right? There's the other part, which is, okay, this is BankBot. It comes out, okay, maybe somebody creates a signature for it, all this, the security solutions that are out there. But the reality is this world morphs all the time. I've already been telling you about the evolution we've seen just in this one particular piece of malware, but these things are happening all the time. One of the main things, one of the thrusts for Zimperium is we fundamentally, passionately believe across the board in a few things. One, you've been hearing me talk a lot about. We fundamentally believe if you are going to compromise a device, you actually need to exploit that device in order to wreak your havoc. That's one. The second thing we fundamentally believe in is you have to do your detection on the device without requiring any kind of a cloud lookup. The reason that's important is if somebody's doing a man-in-the-middle attack, they own the network. If you're relying on cloud-only detection of threats, they're going to cut that channel off and you're not going to have any chance to detect anything no matter what. But the third major one is we fundamentally, passionately believe you have to use machine learning. You have to use artificial intelligence to be able to solve these problems. This chart is an example of that. We talked about DNA, device attacks, network attacks, app attacks. Zimperium started because we're the enterprise guys. We care about protecting enterprise. So we care about people being the victims of enterprise being the victim of targeted attacks. We did zero-day detection of device attacks and device exploits because that's what you need to do to take over the device. Then we expanded it to network. In the last 2 years, in the cloud, we've been training our machine learning engine to be able to detect malicious apps, particularly to start off with malicious Android apps on device without requiring a cloud lookup. We announced that capability a couple of months ago. This is a part of that story. And if you think about it, we at the time, based on information from Statista, I always mispronounce it, there were 3 million apps in the Google Play Store, legit Google Play Store, not third-party app stores, which of course increases this thing significantly. We actually did an analysis. We have some of the best mobile malware researchers on the planet. And we actually spent some time saying, okay, how long would it take an average researcher to go through an app and determine if it truly is malicious or not? And then how many of those mobile researchers actually exist on the planet? And when you do that math, the yellow line is the ability, the capacity of all of those researchers to manually go through this stuff. And the orange line, based on growth of the number of apps going into the Google Play Store, is those that need analyzing. The simple fact is, it just doesn't work. It's just like antivirus was years and years ago. So we have to apply machines to this. You cannot apply people to this. And what we've seen in the industry is when people are announcing things, even if you hear things like BankBot, traditionally, as people have been announcing things, it's been 10 million downloads, 4 million downloads, 3 million downloads. If there's that many downloads, that means that the machine learning approaches hadn't caught up yet. And that's something that we are going to fix, right? That is what we're doing. So, Z9 is our machine learning based engine. And it detects zero-day device, network, and app attacks. We have a proven track record of detecting these things without having to update the engine itself. We apply Z9 in two primary ways, kind of like a car company or an engine company, right? Z9 on the device is in a product we call Zips, for Z Intrusion Prevention System. That will, if you are trying to protect the device and all the data that's on the device, let's say in a corporate scenario, you would deploy Zips. It protects the data, it protects the device. It is literally like next generation antivirus for mobile. If, however, what you're trying to do is you're trying to protect an app or the sessions of an app, let's say in a mobile banking scenario, like what we're talking about here, you would deploy Z9 and its machine learning based detection of the DNA attacks in what we call ZApp, which is Z in-app protection. It is literally an SDK, small SDK that drops in a matter of minutes. You can be protecting against all the exact same attacks, but you're protecting the session with your bank against things like BankBot, which I'll talk about here in a second, and or the app itself, versus Zips, where you're protecting the device 100% of the time. Either one of those sends information back to the enterprise dashboard, which is what we call Z Console, that's up in the cloud. And then behind Z Console, particularly when it comes to the Zips scenario, where I'm trying to really protect my own data, my own devices, is a capability we have called Z3A, which is advanced app analysis. Whereas Z9 will detect malicious apps. There's a bunch of apps that, if you're looking at a corporate environment, a bunch of apps that have privacy and security risks. That's what Z3A would help you do. It's a mobile app reputation service. So those are the two different ways that we roll it out there. Particularly as it pertains to BankBot is the ZApp scenario. So what happens here is you take the SDK, you would embed it into an app. When you embed it into an app, it has all the same DNA detection capabilities, jailbreaking detection, everything else along. You can read the things here. But what it does is instead of taking that information in, let's say, in a zip scenario and saying, hey, look, I detected something, maybe work with an EMM to decide what we're going to do to remediate that. In this case, it's all within the app. And so it'll say, hey, we just detected that this phone had been jailbroken. What do we want to do with that? Do we want to notify the user? Do we want to raise the fraud score? What is it that we want to do? If we notice that there's a man-in-the-middle attack occurring, do we want to suggest to the user, say, look, this is a dangerous network you're on, please disconnect before calling again? It's totally up to the app developer to decide what he wants to do. The screenshots to the side here are, we have an app that we've done just for fun ourselves as a proof of concept and a demonstration of this. That was a Bitcoin application. And by embedding it inside the Bitcoin application, as soon as it detected that there was compromise on that device, you could wipe the wallet so that it wouldn't be able to be pulled, because, as people know, with Bitcoin, it's whoever finds the wallet has the wallet, just like a regular one. So the whole idea of ZApp is, how do we protect mobile apps and the sessions that people are having with mobile apps? So with BankBot, to just kind of wrap this up, and we'll see what sort of questions and comments we may have, and also what Akil might want to add into this whole thing. In this case, by having ZApp installed into that targeted app, right? We said it was BNB Bank, or BMP, or BMB, sorry. It's 12:30 in the night here in the States. By having that SDK inside of that app, when somebody would go open that app, the app would open up and it would scan, and it would be able to determine, wait a minute, either it could determine this thing is compromised because this guy's got some really unique privileges and doing some weird stuff. It could also be able to be scanning the apps that are around it and say, wait a minute, this is one of those guys that we know is exhibiting malicious behavior. Because I mentioned, when it gets downloaded now, it's smart enough to get through the front door to not activate its malicious payload until later. Well, when it's actually executing, when it's actually targeting the bank, that malicious payload and that malicious activity that is the function of what we can detect with our machine learning is occurring. So in either scenario, at that point in time, now it's a race condition. There's a very good possibility that the user might have already given up their credentials, for instance. So we would work with each institution to say, okay, how do you want to react to this? Do you want to, immediately, terminate any access that anybody can have until they call or until they reset their password? Do you want to raise the fraud score? What do you want to do as a part of this whole equation? But things like BankBot are very much what the focus of ZApp is, because it's a perfect example of how do we ensure that the institution does not take the hit for the fact that this user inadvertently did something dumb by installing this free app that brought BankBot into the house with us. So very quickly, that is the story about BankBot. That's how BankBot works. It also talks about the fact that BankBot is more than just a phishing Trojan, that it has now the ability to, if they want to monetize it or weaponize it in a different way, do a lot more additional capabilities because it has gotten to the D of the DNA, and then a brief conversation about Zimperium and how we would be able to help with that. So with that, Akil, anything else you want to say as I pop over and see if we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, I think, JT, I would like to add a few points related to apps and their vulnerabilities. Developers of apps are very good in what they are good functional developers. They are looking for interface type of features. They are looking into connectivity into the internal systems of the apps that they're building for. Say, if it's a consumer app for a bank, it will be connecting to various internal systems. They are very, very good at actually defining that functionality, etc. What they are not experts at is cybersecurity level protection. And that's the solution that Zimperium offers with its ZApp offering, in which we embed actually, and we offer an SDK that embeds in the apps that the developers of these applications are developing, and offering a cyber security, sort of proof app, if you will, with our solution. This is something I just want to make sure is conveyed and understood at that audience level. That's all I had, JT.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect, and I think that makes a ton of sense, Akil. I appreciate that. So we only have a few questions here, and so we'll hit some of those. And we are never upset about giving people time back on their day. So we'll run through a few questions, and then what I'm going to do is come back and make sure that everybody has this view. Sorry, make sure that I'm doing it correctly. Because Akil, as he mentioned, is the main person. If you have any questions, if you'd like to set up a proof of concept or anything on those lines, he's the one that can definitely help you with that. And here's his email address. And again, as a part of the deck that we'll send out to everybody, his email address will be on there as well. So the one question we've got right now is a great question, which is, are there any stats or information on financial losses that have occurred as a result of BankBot? The unfortunate thing is, unfortunate just in terms of answering the question, is I don't know of any yet. I actually have some calls into some of the organizations that might be looking at this, the Gartners and the Forresters, et cetera, to see if they've heard. But so far, I do not have any information about financial losses myself. But that's a great question, and we will track it down and get back to you if we can learn anything on it. The other question that came in is asking about why do we believe that this is going to continue spreading, and for me, it's when I was doing the phishing, when phishing sites started beginning. So I'll tell you why I believe this, and Akil can chime in if he would like. But when I was doing phishing sites originally, the company I was doing was actually one of the original predecessors of machine learning-based detection, but it was on Windows-based endpoints. We were trying to detect new attacks that were against those systems directly. phishing sites were a lot easier to do. You could capture a lot more people than trying to go one at a time with different things. And once you created it, you could just keep adding more and more and more templates. And that's exactly the progression that we've been seeing with BankBot. Started off with just Russia, and then it added some of the banks in the GCC, and then now it's, then it kept expanding, right? And part of that, I think, also is, in this case, yeah, they're facing Google. What are the various different ways that I can get around Google, whether it's through a third-party Play Store, whether it's through the App Store, the Play Store directly, et cetera. But then they also have to wonder what's going to happen with the financial institutions. Right now, the majority of the financial institutions, because this is a relatively brand new thing, they don't really have any offensive weapons to deal with this until something like ZApp comes along. So if you can figure out the way to kind of morph your way past Google, or even get into third-party app stores, and there's no real defense at the bank level, it makes total sense just to continue doing it, and to continue doing it, frankly, as fast as possible before the banks actually do start coming back with countermeasures like ZApp. So, Akhil, do you have any thoughts on, on the potential of this expanding beyond the initial set, or would you expect it to? Let me ask you that question.
Yeah. So I think, JT, one point that I would like to get across to the audience is that, vulnerabilities such, caused due to, things like BankBot. Security-focused organizations are very, very conscious of those. Banks, there are a lot of variables that goes with, was there any particular amount of financial leakage that happens? Banks have lost monies related to vulnerabilities, with apps and devices. That's a known fact. How many banks really publish that data? There's a lot of brand and the sensitivity and everything that goes with it. But all I would say is that security conscious organizations are very sensitive about this topic, and they are paying a lot of attention. We are getting a lot of inquiries from the largest banks across the world related to the vulnerabilities that are being caused due to the mobile platform itself, that they offer to their as in a BYOD, as well as enabled by the environment that is enabled by provided to to their employees also. So.
Right. No, completely agree. So that is the end of our questions. So I would like to thank everybody. We will finish this up. We like to try and have these webcasts be maximum of 30 minutes of content, and then 15 minutes or so of Q&A. We're sitting right here at about the 45-minute mark, so I think that is perfect. As I said, finishing back here, looking at this information, if you have any questions at all, if you're interested in seeing a demo of ZApp or whatever the case may be, feel free to ping Akhil. Otherwise, I would just like to thank everybody and hope everybody has themselves a great day. And we will be looking forward to talking with you all very soon.